Passionate, outspoken, insightful. Areva Martin is an award-winning civil rights attorney, best-selling author, legal commentator, and America's advocate. Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report.
Good morning and welcome to our viewers in the U.S. and around the world. To kick off this morning's broadcast, do me a favor. Please share the show with your online friends or start a viewing party. And remember, post a comment or a question. Your voice matters, and I want to hear from you. Chicago has experienced one of the most violent years in recent memory. Shootings have increased by 75%, and murders are up by 51%. Sadly, over 414 people have been killed to date. This time last year, that number was 275. But Chicago is not alone. Violent crime is up in major cities across the US. Some experts blame a perfect storm that combines coronavirus pandemic with anger against the police. Trump blames Black Lives Matter protests and says he will put an end to the violence by sending heavily armed federal agents to police the streets of select cities. Today, we are focusing on Chicago. What is fueling the spike in violent crime in the Windy City? And is Trump's proposal a realistic solution or a formula for disaster? Let's discuss. My first guest is Cherie Tribbitt. 3 of her sons and her nephew were shot and killed in the same Chicago neighborhood. Good morning, and thank you for joining me, Ms. Tribbitt. First, I just want to say and give you my condolences on the loss of your son, Joseph, and also on the loss of your, the other losses that you've suffered. I can't, as a mother, imagine what you're going through. And I just thank you for being willing to sit down and just have this conversation about really the rising gun violence that's happening in Chicago. So can you tell us a little about Joseph? We hear these numbers about people, the numbers of people getting killed in Chicago, and it's easy to think of these as just numbers. But we know these are real people with families that love them. So tell us a little about Joseph. What was he like?
Well, Joseph, he was a young man with an old soul. He was my oldest son, a loving son, a caring brother, a caring uncle. He loved his family. He kept us together. He was loved by his friends. He was very so much loved by his friends. The social media just poured out their love for my son Joseph. A working hard man, always been. Wow. For him, his life to get taken like that from gun violence, he didn't deserve that. Don't nobody deserve this, and he was just a good, loving son. And I miss him
tell
really.
Us what happened to Joseph? How was he killed?
Well, as far as I know, still don't have the information. They say it was a drive-by, but he wasn't the intended target. But he was walking with a friend, and he just was there, and he was the one that got shot.
Wow.
And
so this happened on the south side of Chicago on the Memorial Day weekend, right?
Correct. May the 24th.
May the 24th.
Was his, yes, and he was just, in fact, he just got off from work, and he was waiting on his significant other to come pick him up, and he was gone.
Wow.
He was gone.
So I know for you, Ms. Tribbitt, this isn't your first loss. You've actually lost 2 other sons and a nephew to gun violence in Chicago?
Yes. That would be my first son, Jeremy. He was 17 years of age. He was killed September 2nd in 2010.
Wow.
And Jawan, 3 weeks later, going to get pizza, and he was killed. Mind you, that they was born and raised around here, around the neighborhood that they was killed in. They was born and raised there. So we was loved by everyone. And then 2 years later, my nephew Demetrius got killed, 19 years old. So
Wow.
our heart never healed. It never, ever healed. And and I never was a marcher or protester, but to get my story out through the media or however it may be, just for them to stop the violence. This is too much. Now it's getting to the babies now. These babies don't have a chance. You
So
know,
Miss Trivett, just to make it clear, you lost your teenage sons,
yes,
Jeremy and Jawan, within 3 weeks of each other?
yes, ma'am.
And that was
Yeah,
10 years ago.
September the 2nd for Jeremy, September the 30th for Jawan.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you ever think after burying two sons that you would lose another son to gun violence?
I would never thought that. I'm about to cry, but never thought that at all. You
Wow.
know, and I was still in the healing process, of my other two sons. And then 10 years later, and this is Joseph was a peacemaker. He talked to the young people, to go in the house, He was very respected. And his life was just taken too soon.
You know,
34 years old. I'm
yeah.
sorry.
No, it's understandable. I don't even know as a mother, like you said, you weren't even healed having lost two sons, and
No.
now to have a third one. And the
Yes.
reason I wanted to talk with you, Miss Tribbitt, is because there's this image that every time an African American man gets killed, that
Hmm.
they're somehow a gangbanger, that they're out in the streets doing something. And I know you said
Uh,
Joseph was a hardworking, good,
hard working,
upstanding
lovable guy. All
man.
my boys were. All my boys were. They was well loved.
Yeah.
When you can't go to the store without something happening, there's a problem there. It's a real problem, and it needs to stop. I don't know if to be angry. Yes, I am. I am. Because it don't make any sense. It doesn't. What's behind that finger on that trigger? What's in their mind frame? And they can go home and eat and take showers and smile and laugh. How is that? When it's another side behind that trigger, I mean, be in front of that gun, that he has a family, they have a family that have to deal with this. It doesn't make sense at all. And I'm not the only mother. I pray for mothers and fathers that have to go through this. This is so overwhelming. It takes your soul. It takes your soul from you. And I hate any parent that will have to deal with this heartache. It's
So
overwhelming.
yeah, it's so unimaginable, Miss Trivett. I know
Mm.
that your three sons were all killed within the same neighborhood, right around the same
Same
area.
neighborhood. Yeah, the Chatham neighborhood. Yes, ma'am. Where they
Do
was
you have
grew
any
up at.
fear
Born.
yourself? I know you still have a son, that's here with you now. Do
I
you have any
have
sons by
I
his
have
side?
three other sons. I have three other sons and
Three.
two daughters. Yes. So
Do you have
yeah, I
any
fear for
concern?
them. Yes, of course. Of course, of course. Even going to the store, my daughter, they all work and I pray. That's the key prayer to keep them safe and, to bring them back home, and just to cover them because you just don't never know. You never know.
So I
You
want to
never
ask you,
know.
Miss Trivett, you're so right. We just don't know, and it's so heartbreaking to hear your story of having lost three sons and a nephew. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure you've seen all the news, coverage of what's happening in Chicago, and a lot
Yes.
of different people have what they think to be the solutions. And recently, Donald Trump said he was going to send federal agents into
Mm-hmm.
Chicago to,
Mm-hmm.
stop this violence. What do you think is the solution to ending the violence that we're seeing in Chicago?
There's no, I really can't say. I really can't say. It, if that's what he have to do, but there's also violence behind the truth too, because they're gonna stop. they're gonna stop doing, whatever they need to be done to stop the violence. So is that creating more violence? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. I really don't.
Is
All
there
my
anything?
answer is just yes, just pray. That's all I can do. The march, the protest, as much as they be protesting, it don't seem to work. So if every parent could just share their story, because it's a story, it's a testimony, that needs to get out there, and hearts is hurting behind that trigger. They hurting too. Something is wrong with them for them to take a life like that with no conscience. You know.
If there's anything that you could say, Ms. Tribbitt, to the mayor, to the police chief, to the people whose job it is to end this violence, what would you say to them?
Man, need to do better. You just need to do better. I don't know what it is. The policemen, they need to be interviewed more. I can't say. It would just really hurt. I can't speak what's in the other minds, but I just know that something needs to be done better than what's done out here in Chicago, Illinois. The mayor is trying her best. She's trying, but it's up to the parents as well. We have to train our children, talk to our children, see what's going on in their mind. Something ain't right. Something is wrong with their mind. So if their mind frame is thinking about going out there and killing someone, it's within the house. That's where it starts from. They got to talk to their children. And then maybe with the mayor, it's been a lot of protesting for our mayor. She's really trying her best. The chief police, I really don't know too well because he just got into the office, but we need better protection for our children out here. We really need more protection. We really do.
Well, we've got to leave it there, Ms. Tribbitt, and I think your words of wisdom are so incredibly important. We need better protection for our children. Thank you for sitting down with me. Thank you for joining me. And thank you for being willing to share your story. You're right. Your story and mothers telling these stories hopefully will lead, to an end to this senseless violence, and that we don't have to keep talking about the loss of young men like, the sons that you've lost. So again, thank you for joining me this morning.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Again, my sincere condolences to Ms. Tribbitt and to her entire family in her incredible loss of not one son, not two, but three sons and a nephew. My next guest, she also knows the pain of losing a child. Her 18-year-old son, Terrell, was shot on the south side of Chicago in 2006. Through her pain, she is on a mission to end gun violence. Please welcome Pam Bosley to the program. Good morning, Ms. Bosley.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here on today. I truly appreciate you allowing me an opportunity to talk about Terrell and speak to you about Chicago.
Well, thank you. I'm sure you heard Ms. Tribbitt. I just, it's kind of, you're left speechless when you talk to a mother that has lost three of her kids. I don't even know how you get up every day and put one foot in front of the other and keep going. But mothers like Ms. Tribbitt and like you have managed to do that. And I just, again, condolences to you on the loss of your son, but also congratulations to you on the journey that you took after your son's murder to, turn that pain into something so purposeful. And we're going to talk about your work in that regard as a gun violence advocate, anti-gun violence advocate. But I want to first just have you share a little with us about your son, Terrell. Tell us, what was he like, and what was that tragic day like when he was murdered?
Okay, my son Terrell was my oldest son. We did so much together. He was my best friend. He taught me how to be a mom because he was my first baby. He made me laugh. He was outgoing. He kept me up to date with all the language, you know, the young language. When we went shopping or to church, sometimes they thought I was his sister, and you know, that I lit up like they thought I. He like, yeah, yeah, man. Nah,
He kept you hip,
don't believe the
right?
hype. Don't believe the hype. Yeah. So, I mean, we did everything together. He was a leader. We sung together. Actually, we used to sing in the car together, and I taught him how to sing. My family, my dad, and everybody sing. So I taught him how to sing. So one day we was driving. He's like, "Mom, that's not the key." I'm like, "Boy, I showed you how to sing." So we shared the music. Terrell was my life. He was my everything, and he loved family. He was a Christian. He went to church. He believed in God. He was talented. I mean, he had so much to live for. His goal was to graduate from college, and he was in college. He had just graduated. He was working in college, doing all the right things. And he had just graduated from high school, went to college, and his goal was to be successful in his music and travel around the world. And on April 4th, 2006, while he was at the church, somebody came by shooting and stole my son's life. They took his life. He was shot once in the shoulder, but with a 45 caliber. From what they said, it traveled through his body and it destroyed him. And from that moment on, I couldn't live that first year in 2006. I tried to take my life twice, and by taking pills and everything because the pain was so dreadful and hurtful. But then on April 4th, 2007, God woke me up with the sun in my face saying, "Get up," and I was like, "God, really, you kept me here?" So I realized then that God kept me here for a purpose, not just to do the other things I'm doing, but for my other two sons. I do have two sons, and Miss Tribbett, she broke my heart because my goal every single day is to fight hard so my other two sons can live. I never want to ever deal with this again because it's a horrible experience.
Yeah. So do you worry, Miss Bosley, about your
Yes.
other sons? You have to be
Yes.
fearful that something like what happened to Terrell could happen to them.
Yes, I worry every single day. My one son, he's in college, his major, he injured as an engineer major, and my other son is a truck driver. But when they leave the house, I pray every day that they all return, not just my sons, but my husband, all of us, because lives are being taken every single day. And my younger son, he liked to be young, go to the parties, and even though it's the COVID-19, he liked to hang with his cousins. He social distanced himself, but he's still young, he's 22. So I worry every single day because I live in Roseland. I live on the south side of Chicago, in the heart of the community where everything is happening. So I'm very concerned. So when he walked back in the door, I'm so grateful to God when my children walk back in the house.
Wow. So Miss Bosley, did they ever catch Terrell's killer? Because I know Miss Tribbett said that they hadn't given her any information about Joseph's murder.
No, we went to court for 2 years. They rushed my case. My case got a little media coverage, more than I guess others. So they wanted to solve a case, and they solved Terrell's case without enough evidence. So when we went to court, when I was listening, they didn't have evidence, and I had never been to court before, and of course, on a murder case, and I knew they didn't have enough evidence, but they rushed the case, so they didn't have enough evidence, so they acquitted the person that murdered my son. So since then, I've been putting up flyers, offering $5,000 through Father Flager, putting poster boards up, trying to get Terrell's case off, and I got information. And people came to me and told me what happened. They told me that it was a joke. Somebody played a joke and played Terrell was in this game, and somebody shot him across the street. When the person shot him, then they stated, "Oh, we was just playing Terrell." That wasn't him. So I said, "Really?" So my son was taken from a joke. But of course, I gave the information to the police, and nothing's done. Nothing has been done.
So you said almost a year later, after you were so grief stricken that you tried to commit suicide on two occasions, that you had this epiphany where you said, let me get up and start turning this pain into something purposeful. And I know you've been on a mission since then, Ms. Bosley, to keep kids in that south side of Chicago neighborhood safe and to end some of that gun violence. Some of the pictures of you, demanding justice for your son are just these are riveting photos of you making sure that your son's murder, is never forgotten and wasn't in vain. So, what are some of the activities that you've been involved in now, to address some of the gun violence in Chicago?
What I did was, after Terrell's death, I started the Terrell Bosley Anti-Violence Association on behalf of Terrell. So in Chatham, I go out usually, we're in a pandemic now, but what I usually do is do basketball tournaments during this time, and do different things like give out food, and during the winter time we give away coats. But this year we doing, actually this Saturday, on behalf of Terrell, we're giving out food in Chatham. We're giving out boxes of food, and we're gonna barbecue and just try to bring some life and some joy back into that community. And I started Purpose Over Pain too in 2007 with other moms, Annette Holt and some more of them. We all came together to support each other. So we started a support circle. We advocate for common sense gun measures, and we mentor young people. And we still, even though we're in a pandemic, we've been having support circles on Zoom twice a month for parents. And because we understand how hurtful it is. We're dealing with a pandemic and an epidemic at the same time. And we understand that parents are suffering. So Mother's Day, we had somebody deliver them roses, and we've been sending out gifts like little necklaces like I have on now. So we've been doing a lot to support each other because we need each other. Plus, we've been just going out doing pop-ups and just trying to uplift the community.
And I love that. And I want to bring in now to the conversation Cedric. Cedric has been, he's the outreach, his name is, I'm sorry, Curtis and
Curtis.
Kohler. He's the outreach director for Chicago CRED. And Curtis, good morning. I think you're with us now. Thank you so much for joining us, Curtis. I know, actually, we found Ms. Bosley because of your connection, Curtis. And I believe the two of you have worked together in some anti-violence type activities in the city of Chicago. So Curtis, tell us what Chicago CRED, what does it do?
Chicago CRED was founded in 2016 by the former Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan. And so we came up that with a resolution that we wanted to have a dramatic reduction in gun violence. We needed a radical reduction in gun violence if we wanted to see communities strive the way that we believe that they should. And so we thought that the best way to do that is to work with those who are most likely to shoot or be shot. And so we provide a array of different services, whether it's life coaching, street outreach, mental health counseling, and an array of other services as well.
So Curtis, tell me, before the show, you and I had a conversation about you having been in a gang at some point prior to you doing the work that you're doing now. So when you look at what's happening in Chicago, what do you think is fueling the spike in the increase of, shootings and these violent episodes that are played out over the media?
Well, when I think about when I was in leadership of street organizations, we called it organized chaos. What you see now is more unorganized chaos. And I think the same thing that drove the numbers to be as high as they were when I was in the street. When you think about in the 90s, we were averaging about 900 homicides then. One life lost is too much, but still the systematic injustices that caused us to be the way we were, nothing has changed since then until now.
So I want to ask both of you, the mayor said on Sunday at a press conference that she welcomed federal agents coming into Chicago. She said it's not going to be what is being played out in the media as it relates to Portland, but she says she needs those agents, or those agents can help get the illegal guns off the streets of Chicago. Ms. Bosley, what do you think about federal agents coming into the city? Do you think that's the solution?
My concern is we are faced every single day in our community with violence, economic and education disparity. And I understand we need a right now plan. But my concern is with Trump being a dictator and always demonstrating racism throughout his actions, it makes me very concerned because I have two Black young men that live in the community, and you're assigning Homeland Security investigative officers that have no experience with dealing with people, and for sure Black people. So to reduce violence, I'm really concerned about it. So if you want to send in some stuff, send in something to us, I need him to send in resources. We constantly say how we need resources. So send resources to the south and west side of Chicago. We need Trump to, increase in. We have a lack of our education system is messed up. We need him to invest in the Department of Health to build a mental health facility. We don't need more policing. We need Trump to invest in the Justice Department to crack down on illegal guns that's flooding our community. We need Trump to send investigations, invest in the civil rights lawyers to protect the communities from hate crimes. So we need things in our community. We need resources. We need education. Policing is not the answer. So now you send in. Actually, I was just working out the other day, and I saw the federal agents that they send in here, and they're all white. So that concerns me. We already dealing with the police pulling over my sons. About a year ago, they pulled over my younger son. They pulled him over because they claimed his lights was off on the back, and the man came to his car with his gun drawn on my son. My son's a college student, and he was like, "We teach our children to hold on to the steering wheel. We teach them to, to say yes, sir, and all this, and then they still get shot." So you send in more people in my community to stop this, and I'm really concerned. I'm concerned.
What about you, Curtis? What do you feel about hearing that federal agents may be coming into Chicago? Do you think there is a legitimate role for them to play with local law enforcement to try to get some of the illegal guns off the street? Or do you think this is just a formula for disaster?
First of all, I agree with everything that Ms. Bosley said. And again, we can't lock our way up out of this problem, right? And if that's the plan, that plan hasn't worked, numerous of times. Even when you thought about the war on drugs, that plan didn't work. So if you think about Chicago, we haven't been under 400 homicides since 1965. So this problem hasn't just started, right? So again, we don't need more guns and more police. We need more resources and more help for these communities.
And so,
can I say one more thing too?
Oh, absolutely.
I'm hoping that they send in. They stated they're gonna send in people to solve these cases. Over 80% of the cases are unsolved. So if they're gonna send in anybody, let them be detailed to solving our cases, because like we said, we need investments, resources, opportunity, not more violence, to stop violence.
No, great point, Ms. Bosley, absolutely. And it's really shameful that all we hear from Trump is about law and order, policing, but we are not hearing any conversation about those resources that we know are so critical and what are so woefully missing in urban communities throughout this country. So not just Chicago. But Curtis, I want to ask you, so you tell us about the mindset, because one thing Ms. Trivett said that really stuck with me is saying the person behind that trigger, what is going through the mind of that person who's taking the life of someone? Help us understand, having been on the streets, what is going through the 16, the 17-year-old kid who's not even a man yet, who we know some of these crimes are being committed by?
So I think with anything, you always have to go back to the root of it, the root cause of it. And I think that's something that some folks seem to overlook. You have to, when you think about slavery, when you think about segregation, when you think about Jim Crow, we'll start there, right? And then on top of, police brutality, right? Then on top of, wherever there's poverty, not only here in Chicago, but throughout any urban community and abroad, poverty equals violence, right? And so we don't have just a gang problem like a lot of people think, right? We have a gun and a drug problem here in Chicago, right? Let's first talk about how all these guns come into our communities, these guns of mass destruction. They take so many out, the next day they're right back in, right? And then when I say we have a drug problem, I don't mean that we have a drug dealing problem like we did in the 90s. We have a drug epidemic problem that these young folks are taking. When you think about the Mollies, right? When you think about the ecstasy, they get high and then they can't come down. So then they have to take a Xanax or a Percocet, right? So now you have a chemical imbalance, right? On top of all of the trauma, on top of everything that I just said. And the Willie Lynch chip has not yet been deactivated on top of a trigger with an AK-47.
So you think it's the combination of drug use in the community and access to these illegal weapons that are getting into the city?
On top of everything else that I said that led up to the so-called
Systemic
black on black
racism,
crime.
poverty.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
ma'am.
So, what do you think, Curtis, about efforts to have stricter gun control laws? Because some advocates say we don't need more laws. We have enough laws on the book. We need to address these systemic issues that you just identified: poverty, poor education, a lack of housing, lack of job opportunities for young men in our communities. Do you think we need stricter gun control laws?
I mean, I think we need less guns. Let's start there. I had a conversation with a young lady. I believe that she was from New Zealand, right? And when she was asking what's going on in Chicago, right? And when I told her that it was a gun problem, it was ironic that she said the only time that she ever saw a gun was in a museum, right? And so when you think about there's actually places, right, that don't have guns, and then you think about what the disparities in those countries, and then what we have going on over here in the United States.
No, and that's an excellent point. We obviously have too many guns on the streets, and the guns in the hands of young kids who are also perhaps impacted by drugs, and then impacted by all of these systemic issues that you've identified as a formula for the kind of crime that we're seeing. I just want to end with you, Ms. Bosley. If there was one thing that you could say to a mother out there who has a teenage son like yours, or a young son like yours, who's worried every time that kid walks out that door, and they live in Chicago, they live in St. Louis, they live in Baltimore, they live in Detroit, what would you say to that mom?
You know what? It's I don't know what to say, because of the fact it can happen. Nobody's exempt from this. I learned that from Terrell's situation. So the only thing I do is pray to God every single day to protect my family and protect us from this gun violence, because people worry about COVID-19, but we got more people that's being shot with bullets than we have being affected by COVID-19. So to the parents, the only thing you can do is pray, but reach out for help if you need help. You have CRED that you just talked to, Curtis, and then St. Sabina, we have a group called Strong Future. We are there for you. And parents, if you lost your child, Purpose Over Pain, we're there to support you. So we're there for you.
Well, I want to thank you, Ms. Bosley, for being willing to share your story. And thank you, Curtis, for your advocacy. Both of you all are making a difference. And good luck with your continued great work. And hopefully we'll be having a conversation about how few murders and how we've driven the murder rates and the violence down in communities like Chicago, a city where I once lived, that I love as much as I love my hometown of St. Louis. So again, thank you both for being with me this morning. Wow, these are difficult conversations and no easy answers to how we resolve or how we address the epidemic in gun violence that we're seeing in cities across this country. My next two guests have both spoken out against Chicago's Mayor Lori Lightfoot's handling of looting and the recent spike in violent crimes in the city. I want to welcome Alicia Camille, a member of Good Kids Mad City, and Alderman Raymond Lopez. He's an alderman for the 15th Ward of Chicago. Good morning, Alderman, and good morning, Alicia. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Good morning.
Good morning, Alderman. I want to start with you, Alderman Lopez. You and Mayor Lightfoot, you recently had a pretty profanely raced exchange on a conference call on May 31st. Talking about the mayor's handling of looting and violence in the city. Well, let's listen to some of that exchange.
You commented on everybody. I want an answer. It's not something you ignore. This is a question that I have.
I think you're 100% full of is what I think. If you think we
no offense,
hold on.
Who are you to tell me I'm full of
If you think we were not ready and we stood by and let the neighborhood go up, there's nothing intelligent that I can say to you.
Well, maybe you should come out and see what's going on.
The stupidest thing I have ever heard. I understand you want to preen. I understand that you think that you
Mayor, you need to check your attitude. That's what you need to do.
Okay, Alderman, any regrets about the use of language during that conference call?
You know, that was during the time when our city had just been rioted downtown, and I was very much concerned about what was going on or what could possibly happen to my neighborhoods. Not 2 hours later is when the organized chaos in our neighborhoods hit. And I will never apologize for my passion in trying to protect those that I was elected to represent. And it was clear then, and it remains clear now, that the mayor just simply was not concerned about what was going on in the neighborhoods with regards to the violence then, and still seems to be completely disconnected from the violence we're seeing in our city right now.
You've been a pretty fierce critic of the mayor, Alderman Lopez. What do you think of her comments during that press conference on Sunday, where she said she did welcome federal agents coming in, again, to be clear, not to engage in the kind of, heavy-handed tactics that we see displayed in Portland, but she said she welcomed them to come in to help address getting these illegal guns off the streets of Chicago. Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, first off, let me just say that I think the mayor's been sending mixed, excuse me for my dogs, has been sending mixed messages to the people of Chicago and to this nation. You know, the federal government has partnered with the FBI, the ATF, the DEA for decades now, and they've been involved in and instrumental in trying to break some of these gang syndicates and these drug running operations in our city, as well as the drug cartels that have permeated throughout many of our neighborhoods. And for weeks, she went back and forth with Donald Trump saying, never in my city will I take that help. And then finally capitulated last week saying, well, okay, well, we've come to an agreement, now we'll take them. And I think that if we had just had an open discussion like she said she wanted today at an earlier press conference, where you have to find commonality, you have to find ways to work together. If we would have done this before, weeks ago, we might have been able to save some of the young lives that would have been lost in the meantime with all this political bickering going on. Some of the young people, the toddlers, the youth, the 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, and 3-year-olds who've lost their lives might have been saved if we'd actually put our egos and our politics aside to try and protect the residents of this city.
So obviously the mayor's not here to defend herself, so I'm sure she has a response to your critique of her, Alderman Lopez, but we also are joined by Alicia Camille, and Alicia's been equally critical of the mayor, but she believes that the issue is the need to defund the police in Chicago. Alicia, I want to play a little of your video at a recent rally where you're actually calling on the city to defund the police. Tell us, how does your proposal to defund the police, how will that address the violence that we're seeing in a city like Chicago?
Of course. So intracommunal violence is a reaction and outcome to lack of investment into Black and Brown communities. If you don't have resources, if you don't have money, if you don't have grocery stores, if you don't have mental health clinics, you are then going to, of course, resort to acts of crime. You're then, of course, going to resort to acting in ways that aren't based in what we deem as acceptable. Because if you don't have food to eat, if you don't have money, if you don't have a way to even go to school, our last mayor closed down about like 50 schools in our neighborhoods. So if you don't have all these resources, you are going to obviously resort to doing what you need to do in order to obtain those resources. So a way of guaranteeing less violence in our communities is by funding our communities. I say in the speech that earlier, that's not in the clip, that CPD gets $1.8 billion every single year. They get $4 to $5 million every single day. And they had a $33 million contract with CPS. That alone is over 40%, almost 50% of the Chicago's budget. If we were to get a fourth of that, you would see crime going down, because you look at neighborhoods like Wicker Park and Uptown and Boys Town and all these neighborhoods up north, and you do not see these numbers because they have the resources that won't allow that to happen. So I believe that defunding the Chicago Police Department, because obviously they are not doing their job because of all this money in the world, we are still seeing incidents where they are not even coming to help solve crimes. They're not finding the missing Black girls. They're not doing all these things. So if we are defunding them and refunding into us, we will definitely see a significant drop in crime happening in Black and Brown communities for sure.
What do you think about that, Alderman Lopez, the concept Alicia articulated pretty eloquently the need to shift those resources out of the police and into investments in Black and brown communities.
Well, I think what we have seen as of late is an effort to try and address some of those concerns. And I want to thank Alicia and Good Kids Man City for their activism and for staying on top of the mayor to try and hold her feet to the fire. You know, you have to give it to the youth for keeping that discussion alive. So my hat's off. But, you know, there's a total amount of dollars that are being spent. And if we look at the police budget, yes, it is about $1.4 billion. And I'll be honest, I think that if we're going to have a serious discussion about defunding police, we have to just have a serious discussion about what their roles and responsibilities should be in the city of Chicago. They should not be the end-all catch-all for all of society's problems. Right now, they are your marriage counselor, they are your narcotics, your drug addiction counselor, they are your gang counselor, and they are trying to do more than what they should really be charged with. And if we were to honestly assess what our 911 calls are and fund dollars accordingly based on what the calls for service are, I think that'll provide us a much better picture on where we need to allocate dollars. But when we look at, as Alicia said, you know, funds into communities, you have to take in mind that, you know, yes, the police are a $1.4 billion budget, but our CPS, our Board of Education budget, is almost $8 billion, servicing predominantly African American and Latinos. And if we are not using those dollars well, then we have to look at the totality of, are we getting what our taxpayers' dollars are funding? Are we getting the best use of those dollars? And
So
more
let me
often,
ask Alicia, hold
we
on a
are
second, Alderman. Let me ask Alicia. Alicia, so the Alderman is saying, yes, maybe we need to look at, reallocating some of the police budget, but that there's already, huge chunk of the Chicago city budget that goes into funding programs that impact Black and brown communities. Do you agree with that? He's basically saying we're spending the money, but it's not being well spent. We're not getting a good result for the investment that's being made already. So why should we keep pouring more money into these communities? That's a paraphrase of what he said.
As a Black youth and also as somebody who works with other Black and brown youth, I can tell you that we do not see that money. We do not see that investment. Our music programs are shut down. Our sports teams don't get a lot of funding depending on what school you go to. If you're not a selective enrollment school, you are not seeing that money at all. If you're not a top 20 for CPS, you are not seeing that at all. So like, of course, schools like Whitney Young or Northside College Prep or Kenwood or Jones, they might be seeing it, but like Dunbar, any like alternative school, like they're not seeing money in that way. So I think that like, and also when we think about CPS, we just had the recent campaign of getting CPD out of CPS, and the CPS board voted to keep CPD in schools. So
CPS, you're saying Chicago Public Schools, CPD, Chicago Police Department. Let me ask, I'm running out of time, but I want to ask both of you about the public safety issue, because I don't know if Ms. Tribbett, obviously Ms. Bosley said, yes, we don't need more policing, we need more resources, but for those families that live in these neighborhoods that have had this high level of gun violence, what are you going to say to them about public safety under any plan that calls for you to reallocate resources? So I don't think there's a disagreement amongst, activists or reformists that we need to look at police departments and look at how they're spending their dollars. But the question always comes back to public safety. So, and I know for you, Alderman Lopez, you had a vandalism that just happened to your own home, and you posted on Facebook calling out the quote unquote gangbangers. So when you think about reallocating these resources, who is going to protect the community? What does public safety look like under your plan? I'll let you start, Alicia. So what does public safety look like if the money from the police department is reallocated?
I think we have been indoctrinated in this society to believe that public safety has to include policing by police officers, or this frame policing period. And I don't think that that is true. When we look at Chicago, we see how many police officers we have, and we look at crime levels, and we do not see a decrease in crime, but we see an increase in funding to police officers. So obviously we know and we see and we understand literally statistically that police officers are not keeping us safe. They are actually inherently dangerous.
Okay, but I want you to tell me, what is the alternative? Tell me, if it's not police that are keeping us safe, who will?
it's us. We are the ones who are keeping each other safe. Black and brown people know each other. We know our communities. We know how to communicate with each other. We understand our language. We understand what we need. We understand how we need it, when we need it. These police officers, one, aren't even from the city, so they do not understand.
Help me out here. Somebody breaks in my house. Wait a minute. Somebody's broken into my house. Who am I calling?
Your
Am I
neighbors.
gonna call my neighbor?
Your neighbors, people that you know, people who live right next to you. I always ask this question: how many times have police actually made you feel safe or made you feel protected? And 9 times out of 10, I get the answer: they have not. So police are not helping. We keep us safe. If we fund our communities, if we fund our neighborhoods, if we can pay people who are trained in de-escalation, that's how we also work. And also, real quick, just doubling down on the statement about using the frame of like gangbangers and kind of breaking away from respectability politics. I don't know if you want to touch on what maybe statement that Alderman said, but I do want to be careful using that.
That's his Facebook post. What do you think about it?
I do want to be careful using that language, because when we think about protecting all Black and brown lives, that also includes the Black and brown lives that you may not deem acceptable enough to protect. When we're thinking about helping underfunded, disenfranchised youth that you might be calling as gangbangers, those are the people, those are the Black and brown people who are at a disadvantage because of this capitalistic, systemic, racist society. So I want to be careful using words that are demonizing and stereotyping Black and brown youth who have no choice but to resort to these kind of activities. So just working around that language.
You get a chance to respond. First, Alderman Lopez, you can respond to Alicia's comment about the use of the term gangbanger in your post, but then I want you to, end by talking about what does public safety look like for you if you are in favor of reallocating resources away from the Chicago Police Department.
Sure. Thank you, Ariva. Let me just say this. You have to call it for what it is. And if people are going to be gangbangers, you have to call them for what they are. Gangbangers. You cannot make excuses. You cannot continue to coddle them.
Wait a minute, Alderman. Who? When you use the word gangbanger, like define it for us.
I mean the gentleman who's got the tattoos on his face, who will stand on the corner and throw gang signs and try to stop cars because he wants to know who they're affiliated with while standing on the block. Those are gangbangers. We know.
But will you recognize, and Curtis gave me this education before the show, that there are individuals who are affiliated with gangs, but they are not involved in violence whatsoever. That maybe because they live on a certain block, they are quote unquote gang affiliated, but they've never done anything criminal. They've never been involved in violence. And that when you use the term in a general way, perhaps you're sweeping those kids who have never been involved in violence.
Actually, it's not sweeping. I'm talking specifically about those individuals who are standing on corners, who are throwing up known, recognized gang signs, wearing known, recognized gang colors, trying to approach everyday residents, checking them to see if they belong in the neighborhood, what gang they belong to. That is a known gangbanger. Now, you ask about the...
Okay, and that's also a language in which people like and
Lisa,
then Lori.
I didn't interrupt you, so I'd like to continue. If you talk about what's going on with regards to public safety, you have to isolate those individuals who are 100% committed to that culture of gang life, that cycle of violence, that no matter what program you offer, no matter what job you provide, they will never leave that lifestyle. Now, that is a very small sect of our communities, but that is a recognized.
Well, I just want to push back on that, Alderman Lopez, because I don't believe that. And I know there are a lot of really educated, smart people who believe that everybody is rehabilitatable. So let's start with that.
No, I don't think everyone wants to be rehabilitated. And I can tell you for a fact.
Well, what we're talking
African-American.
hold on a second. What we're talking about is systemic racism and issues that preclude people from having opportunities. So I think you're speaking with too broad of a brush when you say that not everybody wants to be rehabilitated. I'm really running out of time, but just give me like in 10 seconds, if we take money away from the police, who would do public safety under your version of a safe Chicago?
You still need police, but you cannot arrest your way out. You need police to focus on those who are committed to that lifestyle, but you also need to invest.
We're going to have to leave it there, Alderman. I know this is a big conversation. I'm sorry I have to cut you off, but I have another guest that's waiting. But I appreciate you said under your model, we still need police. Alicia says take money away from the police department and reinvest it in Chicago public schools and neighborhoods. Big conversation. Sorry, we're out of time. Obviously, a conversation that needs to be continued and hopefully will be continued, because I don't think we're going to solve this violence problem overnight. But again, thank you, Alicia, for your work, and thank you, Alderman Lopez, for joining in the conversation this morning. These are difficult conversations, and they're really big conversations, and lots of people have lots of opinions. And my next guest has served 40 years in law enforcement and public service. He's the author of In Defense of Public Service, and he's considered one of the nation's foremost experts in policing and public safety. He's no stranger to the show. He's joined me a couple of times before, and I'm excited to have him back because this is such a big topic and we need an expert. So good morning, Cedric. How are you?
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. Woo, okay. So gangbanger, can't use the word gangbanger, investment in communities, defund the police. You just start. So help us make sense of how do we get to the end of this violence we're seeing in a great city like Chicago and our other cities, Detroit, St. Louis, where I'm from, where the violence is just crippling to so many families.
Well, first of all, yeah, and thank you very much for having me. First of all, let's start with Chicago. Chicago still is a great city, and it has great leadership there, I truly believe. And I think everyone that's in a leadership position really have their heart into trying to make a difference. They may have philosophical or ideological differences, but at some point they got to get there because they got to lead people in that city. But let me say this first about the funding. The funding has become a very politicized term. So when I think about it as a former chief in this country, somebody say to me, defund the police, where you're going to take all my money. I have no officers, no resources. I can't provide any protection whatsoever. But really, in many communities, what they're really saying, and I think they're saying in Chicago, is that we need to redirect monies from police budget over to social services, where maybe we can begin to identify, measure through data over time. If we put more money in mental health, we put more money into homelessness, we put more money into education, but and all these social things that we know are very apparent in many of our cities across the country. And it allows our police officers, it doesn't take away from their personnel, their resources, it doesn't take anything away from them, but it allows.
Hold on, Cedric, I gotta ask you.
Prevention. Yeah.
I want to stop you because Alicia says no. She says under her model, and she's not the only one to say that. We've heard a lot of prominent, activists in the wake of George Floyd's murder talk about literally taking resources out of the police department, ending policing as we know it in this country. She just said under her model, your neighbor would be the person that you would contact if someone broke into your home.
Well, first of all,
I think we've got to be honest about the fact that there are people who are saying we should not have police in cities in the way that police departments exist currently.
Well, let me say this. If you don't have police in this country or any other country that's providing public service where people can make a police report, people who are sexual assault victims, people who are robbery victims, people who are homicide victims and their families, whatever the case may happen to be, how do those things get resolved? So yes, you have to have policing. For anyone to think that you can just do away with policing in America, that cannot and it will not happen. People can propose it all day long. It's not going to happen. You cannot live in a civilized society without having some parameters for public safety. Public safety requires that community and police work together. We know that there's a lot of police agencies across this country that need reform. I am a huge proponent of many of these reforms. But
Cedric, again, let me ask you, Cedric, I know you've worked in law enforcement for 40 years. And I know the concept of not having police in US cities is completely foreign, probably to most people. But can you, get outside of your law enforcement background for a minute, but can you envision, and the details have not all been worked out, but Minneapolis just voted to defund its police. They often point to Camden, New Jersey. Can you envision a society where neighbors are playing a bigger role in public safety? And there are some individuals, we're not going to call them police, but there's some people whose job it is to help the assault victim, help the robbery victim, but they're not police as we know them today.
I can very easily get out of the police role. That is the easy piece, but we have to be realistic here. And again, I will say, Ariva, Yes, is there a bigger role that communities can play in their public safety? Yes, maybe it is, but it still cannot be absent of police. And that's where the conversations between police and community and elected officials, they all have to come together. Yes, we need to reimagine policing, but we need to reimagine it in a realistic way. You cannot take policing totally out of the table. You tell me any city in this country, I don't care how rich they are or how poor they are, any town, city, village, anywhere, you're going to have crime. And if you're going to have crime, there has to be a place to report it. There has to be data collection. You have to have investigators. You have to have those that are authorized to make and take people into arrests, right? You have to have the authority to do those things under the color of law. No community can just in of itself, in that I'm aware of, that can just have policing or have a civilized society without having some influence of some kind of organized public safety. So yes, is there more that communities can do to ensure and enhance their own public safety? Yes, but it will not be in absence of policing. Can policing do a better job than what they're doing? Yes, and they cannot do it without the support of the community.
And I think you
so
understand.
those two have to coexist. Yes.
And I think you understand what's happening. Obviously, the images of police, with their knees on the necks of African Americans like George Floyd,
I get it.
The repeated violence that we see in these communities, which is, I want to go back to Chicago. One of the issues in Chicago is the lack of community being willing to even talk to the police. The distrust that community has towards the police is so great that even though 400 people have been killed in that city, oftentimes, as we heard one of the guests say, 80% of those crimes go unsolved because people will not come forward and talk to the police. So when they hear the mayor says, yes, she invites federal officers in, for a lot of people, all they hear is more of the same. More of the same people that have been oppressing us to begin with. Now we invite more of them in. They have more power. Some of these, federal agents, no name tags, no signs, unmarked cars, picking people off of streets, putting them in, vans. That's the imagery that we see when we think about federal agents coming into Chicago. So help us understand how federal agents might be a good thing and not the negative thing that we've seen played out over the media in the last.
First of all, let me say this about crime in Chicago, just like crime in many other cities, but let's speak specifically to Chicago. Chicago crime history did not start with Lori Lightfoot. It didn't start with Rahm Emanuel, and it didn't start with Daley. It has been historic, and historic over time in that city. You have had leadership in that city police department, in those city police departments, who have brought on a great deal of misuse and abuse to people in those communities of color. That's historic in nature. So all of a sudden now, as we fast forward and we look at reform over the years, and as we continue, you have people who still live in those communities who remember the abuse of those police officers, those who have gone on and retired and now left those who are there with their baggage. So they got to build those relationships. So no, people in the community are not going to talk to many police departments across this country because nobody have ever came into their communities and engaged a sense of trust, build relationships. That CSI that you see on television, they don't solve crime. People solve crime. Witnesses solve crimes. That's what gives me a lead to go to the next place, to go to the next place. But when you have a crime rate like Chicago has, and a very small solvability rate around homicides, that's not just suggestive of people don't want to cooperate because the police. There's history attached to that. And it makes the job tough for leaders like Lori Lightfoot, who want to come in, who want reforms, who want to do things. And now you hear this outcry, well, we want federal policing to come into Chicago. There are some people in Chicago saying, no, we don't want them, it's more the same. But you also have people over here saying, yes, we do want them. But here's where we have to give credit to Mayor Lightfoot. She understands the dynamics. She understands that as federal forces are going to come into her city and assist, they're going to be in designated areas. They ain't gonna be on the south side, west side of Chicago. That's everyday crime fighting that's left to local policing. But if you're talking about those that are destroying federal properties in which they're painting over them or destroying them or whatever, and the feds go in, they can't go in the way they go into Portland, as we have seen, and into Seattle. That's what she's saying. You're not going to come into my community with no name badges, without cooperation and support from the locals, and we're sitting down and planning these things together. I think, and I don't know, and I haven't talked to her, but I speculate what she is saying. Yes, we accept federal support, but it's got to be organized. My people must be involved in the planning methodology of what we're going to employ during their times that they're here, and what designated areas that they're going to be in. So it has to be a cooperation. She comes from the federal government. She's a former assistant U.S. attorney. She knows how to work with the feds, but she also knows she's not going to let her community be politicized because some group of federal agents or federal officers coming in and making things worse than what they are. I truly believe that's what she's saying, and we need to give her the benefit of doubt of that.
And I just want to ask you one more question, Cedric. You know, I agree with you. I think I agree with you on a lot of points. I think Lori Lightfoot is doing a good job
under the circumstances.
A bad hand that she's been dealt, as you just said, with a history that she inherited. She walked into, you know, she didn't create the violence. She obviously is not exacerbating the violence. She's doing the best she can. And in these urban cities, unfortunately, that's what, you know, mayors walk into. They walk into that long history, and then they've got to work through that. And it's challenging, no doubt about it. It's very challenging. But if you could sit down with Trump, Attorney General Barr, you know, hopefully, you know, he's not smirking and being a smart ass like we saw yesterday on television. But if you could sit down with the two of them, what would you say, and what would your wish list be around this gun violence that is crippling a city like Chicago?
What I would say, let's not politicize these issues, gentlemen, but let's find a way. Now, they're not going to see it that way. And even if they do, they're not going to admit it. But if we could, Mr. President, General Barr, ask these city leadership, and I don't care whether they're Democrat or Republicans, first of all, stop being divisive and using that language, but ask these city leaders, what is it federal support that we can offer? And what agreement that we can come to be helpful in the crises that are going on in this country today? But we cannot grandstand, well, if this horribly Democratic leadership in this city don't do well, then we're going to come in and we're going to take over. Well, it doesn't work that way, right? It does not work that way. So we got to move away from that. And we move away from that in a leadership position that they're in. What is it, Mayor, that we can do in your city? What is it, Governor? What support can we lend? And let's find a way to do it. But I, as the commander in chief, I'm looking, I'm seeing, I'm hearing people in those communities call the White House. They want support and action. What is it that we can do together? But to grandstand this doesn't make it, it makes it worse. And we can no longer continue with this. The Democratic cities are doing horrible. The Republican cities are doing great. No, all American cities are struggling in one form or another, if they're major cities or moderate-sized cities, and even small cities across this nation. But this is an American problem. This is not a Democrat or Republican problem. It is an American problem. And that's what I would say to them, is that I think that the best interest of the nation at large, and the roles and leadership that you two gentlemen play, is to help this nation come together and forge a relationship so that we can resolve the problems, not just on the street, but also what funding can we put into these cities, such as what you heard the young woman from Chicago talk about, that we can put into these cities to help build these cities up and give people an opportunity and a chance to survive. That's the kind of leadership this nation wants. And I don't care what side of the aisle you are on, you're going to find folks who are going to say, yes, let's do something, let's find some resolve, and let's lead this nation out of this crisis.
Well, we've got to leave it there, Cedric, but thank you for your sage advice. And I think the thing that resonated with me the most is you say, let's do this together. And this is not a Democratic or Republican problem. This is
That's
an
right.
American problem. So when we solve this problem, we all benefit. Again,
all-
thank you so much, Cedric, for your wisdom. Thank you for your leadership on these issues. So critically important. So again, thank you for joining me.
And thank you for having me, Ariva. Thank you.
Absolutely. These are tough. These are tough problems. And, you know, that's the kind of problem that we like on the special report, because we like to deal with these really thorny, difficult issues. And
That's
we
right.
like to get, you know, the sides of people talking, people on the streets, policymakers and leaders. And that's the only way we're going to solve these problems, is by bringing all of those voices together. So thanks to my guest again for being a part of this critical conversation. And thanks to all of you for joining in. Thanks for your comments and your questions. A big shout out to my production team and to our sponsor. You can follow me as we continue this conversation. Follow me at Ariva Martin, because this conversation doesn't stop when the show ends. Just a couple of words to live by before I get out. The stories of Miss Tribbitt and Miss Bosley, and of the thousands of mothers and fathers who have lost their sons and daughters to gun violence, are heartbreaking. I lived in Chicago. I grew up in St. Louis. And although I have never lost a child to gun violence, I have lost cousins, uncles, and childhood friends to senseless gun violence. So I know firsthand the tremendous pain and devastation so many families in Chicago and all over the country experience. But we can end urban gun violence. But the answer is not as simple as sending unwelcome federal troops into cities. There is well-documented research and analysis that points to a set of strategies with a proven track record of success. And it starts with the recognition of what Reverend William Barber talked about last week on the show. It starts with the recognition that there are gross inequities and poverty, which plague so many communities throughout Chicago, St. Louis, Detroit, and big cities. To reduce community gun violence, we don't need more federal troops. We need more jobs, better schools, stricter gun laws, affordable housing, access to capital for small business owners. We need alternatives to violent gangs, and we need incentives for people to make better choices. See, I'm convinced that we don't have to accept the current deadly status quo. We can stop the bleeding in our cities with focused, fair, and well-funded anti-violence and pro-community investment strategies. The fact that we haven't done so is criminal. Y'all be safe out there. Don't forget to wear your mask. And remember, we are all in this together.